Welcome everybody to another Village Torah video. This one, however, this is a special session. This is the final session that Emily, our summer 2021 rabbinic fellow, will be with us for the Village Torah. So she has the very special pleasure of leading this one. So this week is, as she is about to share with us, is Parashat Ekev. We are in the book of Deuteronomy, and this is well, I'll let her describe a little bit more about what she's going to say. So without further ado, here we go. Here is Emily.
Hi, everybody. So this week's Parsha is Ekev, which is the third Parsha in Deuteronomy. But I actually just want to talk about one verse of this Parsha that's actually like one of my favorite verses to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can actually see the source sheet. The verse that I am focusing on for today is Deuteronomy 10:16. It's kind of smack dab in the middle of the Parsha. Parsha goes from roughly chapter 7 through 12, in case you were wondering. And this Parsha says, this verse says, "Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart and be no more stiff-necked." So the first time I read this verse, I was kind of confused by it because, one, it seems a little bit out of place with everything else of the list of commandments that Moses is reminding the Israelites of, and what the heck does it mean to circumcise a heart? We know about Brit Milah, we know about circumcision in the traditional sense, but circumcising a heart doesn't make so much sense to us. So I started out by looking at other places in the Torah, Tanakh, I suppose, that this idea comes out. So there's one other in Deuteronomy that's essentially the same verse. I believe it's in Deuteronomy 30. And then you also have the same word used. The English translation is different, but it is the same Hebrew word, which is either himolu here or umaltem here. And here it says, "Open your hearts to the Lord, remove the thickening about your hearts," which is the same idea as circumcision. And this did not really help me figure out what it meant at all. So we're moving on to some commentary and some rabbinic text to look at what we can learn about what this verse means and what we might be able to take away from it. So now I'm going to go to Rashi, because that's generally the first place one goes. And so Rashi says that this verse means, "You shall remove the closure and cover that is in your hearts, which prevent my words from gaining entrance to them." So there's one possible explanation. You need to take the matter off of your heart in order that you can really accept God's words and hear God's commandments. That makes sense with the context of the Parsha, because in this portion, Moses is reminding the Israelites of all of the commandments they have to fulfill in order to have the lands in the way that they want it, have this perfect land. So that's the main point of the Parsha. So that makes sense. I wasn't 100% satisfied with this answer because I don't think it doesn't fully explain it, at least for me. It's obviously up to you what you think about it. So then I went to the Talmud. And I realized that that this is the Babylonian Talmud. I did not put that in front of there, but this is the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat 108a. And Rabbi, would you mind reading this translation for me?
All right. Karna also asked, "Whence is it derived that circumcision is performed in that place?" Rav answered him, "It is stated here with regard to circumcision, and on the 8th day he shall circumcise the flesh of his foreskin," Leviticus 12:3. And it is stated there with regard to recently planted trees. "And when you come to the land and plant all types of fruit trees, and you shall count the fruit thereof as forbidden," it's the same word, "3 years shall it be as forbidden unto you, it shall not be eaten," Leviticus 19:23. Just as there, the Torah is referring to a tree, which is an item that bears fruit, here too, in the case of circumcision, Arla is referring to an item that bears fruit. So he asked him, So say that circumcision should be performed on one's heart as it is written, and you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart. From this verse, say that circumcision should be performed on one's ear as it is written, behold, their ear is dull and they cannot listen. From Jeremiah 6:10. Rav said to him, one derives the meaning of the complete form, arlato, or his uncircumcised, from another instance of the complete form orlato, and one does not derive the complete form orlato from the incomplete form orlat, which modifies another word, as is also the case with the word arela.
Okay. So this gives us a better idea of a bunch of different kinds of circumcision that are possible. We once again have the traditional circumcision, brit milah, the baby boy's circumcised on the 8th day of his life. So then we also have in this idea of the fruit tree, which you're counting the fruit, you have the reference to what seems to be foreskin again, even though that doesn't seem to make a ton of sense. But the Torah is referring to a tree. This bears fruit. Also, obviously, the contribution to reproduction is the comparison that is being made here between the circumcision and the bearing of fruit. So then we ask, what does that mean about the circumcision of one's heart, or one's ear?
Can I mean,
Go ahead.
I think that is a very particularly English translation of arla as saying foreskin, because that's in specific with that particular case, but with trees, and then obviously with hearts and ears. So maybe just an outer covering, which, broadening that translation. Yes? No?
Sure, but the word for circumcised is still the same, so that doesn't actually change very much about the point, like the
Well, how we would translate the arla, I think, is the
maybe, but when else do we use the word circumcised that's not in relation to a very specific instance? So in context, yes, that is a good point, but at the same time, whether you translate it as foreskin or not doesn't actually seem to change the fact that it's saying you need to circumcise the heart.
So it's more about what is the action. You're more focused on the action than
I am more
what is-
focused on the action than the
Gotcha.
thing you are removing,
Okay.
because that doesn't because it's the same word, or at least the same source, the same root every time that we see it. And so Rob then says that the meaning of the complete form is different than the meaning of the incomplete form, which I'm not going to get into because that's a philological argument that I do not have the qualifications to explain. But we are so that's a proposed explanation or proposed comparison, I suppose. It's not really an explanation. It is listing all of these different things, seeming to put them in the same category and look at how they might be working. Now we go to the Midrash. I think, this is, I believe, the last actual source I brought, and then I wanted to pose some questions. So we now go to the Midrash, this is from Midrash Tanhuma, and it's from the Midrash that goes with one of the first portions of the Torah. So this is the part of the Torah where God tells Abraham to go out from his father's house, place where he was born, and go to this land that God will show him. So this reads, when the Holy One, blessed be he, told Abraham, walk before me and be thou wholehearted, Genesis 17:1, Abraham began to wonder. He said to himself, surely until now I have been whole in body, but if I circumcise myself, I shall be incomplete. There are 5 prepuces, 4 in a man and 1 on a tree. The prepuce of the ear, as it is written, behold, their ear is uncircumcised. That's the piece we also just saw in the previous source. The prepuce of the heart, as it is written, remove the obduracy of your heart, or the foreskin, or however you would like to translate orla or orlato. The profuse of the tongue, as it is said, of uncircumcised lips. That is in reference to Moses, I believe. Or that is at least one of the phrases that is used to describe Moses's perceived disability. The prepuce of the flesh, as it is written, you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin. This is the traditional circumcision. If I should circumcise any one of these prepuces, my organs will be incomplete. The Holy One, blessed be he, asked him, why do you believe that you are whole? In fact, you lack 5 limbs. Before you were circumcised, your name was Abram. The Aleph in your name is 1. The Bet 2, the Resh 200, and the Mem 40. And that totals to 243. This is using something called gematria, which is a system in which you take Hebrew letters and assign numbers to them based on where they are in the alphabet. This is a relatively common system that the rabbis tend to use in order to make a point. It's also still used in many prayer books or things that we can look at that use these numbers instead of the Arabic numbers, which are the numbers that you would traditionally think of in English parlance as numbers. That's an aside. However, man's limbs total 248. I think that this, I forget what the Hebrew was, but I'm pretty sure this is like body parts or bones. Limbs is maybe not the best translation of this word, because obviously we do not have 248 limbs, I hope, of our body, but that's the translation of it. Circumcise yourself and you will be whole. So the idea here is that in order to be whole, so to be 243, which is Aleph, Bet, Resh, and Mem, added together, obviously, you need to remove 5 things from your 248. And those 5 things are these different kinds of circumcision that the text is pointing out. And so the rest of the Midrash reads, after he was circumcised, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, no longer is your name Abram, henceforth it will be Abraham. He added a hey, which equals 5 to his name, making a total of 248, corresponding to the number of limbs in the human body. Hence, scripture says, be thou whole. So this is kind of a different question. This is less, what does it mean to circumcise the heart? And what does it mean for the overall human to circumcise anything? To take away a part of the body or the tree, which is a different conversation. I still remain a little bit confused as to why the tree is included in the story about Abraham. Or Abram, I guess, if I'm being more accurate in my wording. But this is obviously in reference to Abraham's sort of objection to, I suppose, sacrificing a part of himself in order to fulfill this commandment, which would lead us to believe that those things were important to a past version of Abram. And what exactly that means, I think, can sort of loop back around to what Rashi says about the circumcision of the heart. So Abram at this point is sort of learning how to listen to God. He's learning to trust God. It's all kind of new at this point. He hasn't had the space to welcome in God's words appropriately yet. And that's when we get back to Rashi, if I can find it. Here it is. Who then says, you shall remove the closure and cover that is on your hearts, which prevents God's words from gaining entrance to them. So that is one of the possible explanations for this, and it does seem to be the one that the Midrash is relating to, or at least that's what I'm extrapolating it to be related to, because I think that we need to be, and then I can also generalize this to an extent of like, we need to be open to new things and to not hold and calcify. I think that word is the word I'm looking for. Not calcify things around ourselves in order that we are able to sort of move forward and to appropriately, as Abraham said, like to as Rashi said, I just switched sources. To appropriately listen to God's word or to appropriately do what's right, because not everyone has the same concept of what God is going to look like in their life. If we're applying this outside of the vacuum of the text, I think that it's necessary to think about how this might be actually related for us. Because we're not circumcising 5 parts of our body. The midrash is a midrash. It's not a true story or a true thing that we can follow. So what does this command, for lack of a better word, or proclamation mean? I mean, for me, and then I would love to hear from both of you as well. For me, it means to remove some of the past and to not hold grudges, because that's the calcification. Like stress literally calcifies parts of your heart. That is actually a medical thing that is possible. And I'm not claiming this is related to the medical thing. I'm just saying that that is a relation I'm seeing between it. And stiff-neckedness, which I didn't focus on here, is very connected to stubbornness. It is connected to this idea that the Israelites at the time refused to listen to God and to do the things that God was saying. And so Moses is sort of pleading with them to remind them, like, hey, you got to do this in order to have what you want in the long run. And so stubbornness and open-mindedness are the things that I take from this commandment, but I would love to hear what the two of you take from this commandment as well.
If I understand correctly, this commandment means to me not to hold grudges, but to move forward in a positive manner, not to be judgmental, remove all the hardness from our heart, the inside or within our mind, toward our fellow man. That's how I think it. Is that all correct?
I think that's very similar to how I understand it, even within the context of the sources, yes. Rabbi, would you like to contribute to this?
Yes. Okie dokie. So my first question, Emily, is, so you mentioned the first time around for Rashi, you said you weren't really into his explanation. Is there a reason why? Like what didn't grab you from his explanation?
I mean, I don't fully believe my theology does not match up with that explanation is probably the best way of explaining why I didn't relate to that explanation. Is I don't believe that we as individuals are necessarily capable of receiving words straight from God.
Okay, interesting. So it's about receiving words from God.
Well, that's what Rashi is sort of saying is like that, or at least that's what it's implied. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it could just be the words that Moses is speaking. So even if
it could.
not God,
that's not how I interpreted it, but that's definitely possible.
Okay. Another thing that I think it's worth pointing out is, especially in the Bible, heart doesn't mean like the way that we conceptualize of hearts. It was more of sort of the seat of the intellect, so their minds.
Yeah.
Right. So then it's about processing and even it's the openness which you mentioned. I'm curious also, how do you ultimately sort of understand and otherwise appreciate the midrash? The last one, the midrash Tanchuma. I know you kind of dismissed it at the end, but how do you ultimately?
Well, I mean, it's not answering the question I was asking, which is why I dismissed it a little bit. But as a midrash, I think it's beautiful. it just wasn't answering the question I was asking. So midrash, I think it's a beautiful midrash about the wholeness of human beings and what and how and the importance of following these commandments, following the commandment to circumcise the ear, which is really to I view that as to like be open to listening to other positions, and circumcise the heart, which and that's, by the way, the heart being the center of the intellect and the person is a very pretty universal ancient view of most cultures at that time, and actually probably through about 100 CE as well. So that's sort of where I got the open-mindedness part from me. I found it really interesting to look at how the rabbis decided to put all of these things together and to see the comparison of all of the 5 verses, because I had not known about every single one of those verses before I found this midrash for the first time. How do you interpret the verse?
So I think a big part of it is the stubbornness, just sort of the stubbornness in general of look, Jews are a stubborn people. They were certainly known for that biblically. It's not necessarily gone away. Yes, in the subsequent verse, it does talk about God, and there's this whole thing about what we should do. And what precedes it is talking about your fathers, your ancestors, and this whole relationship. So sort of within the very particular literary context, it's talking about having an openness of a relationship and listening to God, and sort of being in that relationship, as opposed to but at the same time, Jews are and have been and will be a stiff-necked people. And I almost, to some degree, I almost see this verse almost as in a tension with our being. There are 2 parts to this verse, and they kind of mirror each other, so that your necks, you should not continue to make stiff, right? You shouldn't harden your necks, and that you should open up your minds, as it were. But at the same time, we also have that, like we also are I don't know. We have our opinions, let's just say. And so it's kind of funny. Like I see a little humor in that tension, but it's also, we should, even though we have this stiff neckedness, at the same time, maybe this is something that we should be looking to also at the same time open up.
Yeah, it's definitely an aspirational commandment more than it is a current commandment, because naturally as humans, we're obviously have a self-preservation instinct, which is where stubbornness comes from for the most part, and defensiveness comes from for the most part. But I would hope that this would remind us to fight a little bit against that original human nature, because that's not always the most productive thing in every single circumstance.
Right. Although it's just fun. It does point up the sort of the humor of, we are a stiff-necked people, and we're going to be, and I think it continues to this day. I think it's gone on forever. Biblical times, rabbinic times, medieval times, our times, where we're enjoying to have this relationship with God. We're supposed to be doing certain things in relationship with God, and we don't. And we're like, and so I think it continues, right? It's just one of these evergreen issues for the Jewish people.
Sure.
I don't think there's ever been a person who's done literally. I know the rabbis wanted to talk about the avot and the imahot as having done every single mitzvah, even the ones that had not been given at Mount Sinai. It's a cute midrash. At the same time, I don't think anybody's ever fully done every single mitzvah. Right? There's no perfect person, and I think it's a tension that we all continue to live with as Jews. Right there, as you mentioned, there's an aspirationality to it. We aspire to certain things, but we also live in our tensions with not necessarily achieving those things.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. That's my take.
Okay.
I think your take is good.
Thank you.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to teach in the way that I have been able to through this series, and I hope that you have enjoyed some of the things that I have been able to talk about. And I've also learned some new things in my process of figuring some of this stuff out. And I would be happy to hear anything you notice about this Torah portion or this verse in particular. And I guess, is this a Shabbat Shalom moment?
Well,
And Shabbat Shalom.
yes. So,
Shabbat
and if
shalom.
anybody wants to stay in touch with Emily, I will be sure to keep you in touch with her. And it's definitely been a great opportunity to have, once again, another summer fellow, a summer rabbinic fellow. It's a excellent opportunity to not only bring another person, another character, another, energy into the building, but also to be able to, as she is doing right here, sharing her Torah, but also with her singing, with her leading davening, which is, as many people have experienced, it's very exciting the last few months for this to come back after many months of not being able to have davening, programming, etc. So it's been really wonderful to have Emily here this summer. And so if you want to stay in touch with her, you can definitely reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you. And in the meantime, I want to say, Emily, thank you so much. All
My
right.
pleasure.
And with that,
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.